As Brazil prepares to host leaders for the BRICS Summit, we'll discuss this year's top priorities. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. All eyes will be on Rio de Janeiro this week as leaders gather for the 17th BRICS Summit. In 2006, Brazil, Russia, India and China formed the group of emerging economies and then added South Africa in 2010, renaming the bloc BRICS. Today, there are 11 member countries and 9 partner countries, representing nearly 50% of the world's population. Earlier this week, the Chinese Foreign Ministry discussed the importance of the alliance.
The BRICS cooperation mechanism is the most important platform for unity and cooperation among emerging markets and developing countries in today's world, and serves as a significant force in facilitating the realization of an equal and orderly multipolar world and an economic globalization that is inclusive and beneficial for all.
For more on the BRICS Summit, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Rio de Janeiro is Vitelio Brustolin. He's a professor of international relations at Fluminense Federal University and researcher at Harvard University. And from Beijing, Wang Huiyao is a former counselor with the China State Council and the founder and president of the Center for China and Globalization. Thanks to both of you for being with us. Wang Huiyao, let me start with you. The Chinese Premier Li Qiang will be at the summit, which takes place in Rio de Janeiro. The Chinese Foreign Ministry also said that Beijing hopes to consolidate the BRICS strategic partnership, uphold multilateralism, improve global governance, and promote high-quality development. What will you be looking for in terms of the steps that this alliance would have to take to realize those goals?
Well, I think that this BRICS summit is very timely, as we see the world has facing new protectionism, unilateralism, of course, geopolitical tensions. But BRICS as a whole, basically is a new rising political alternative or political forces that really to strengthen multilateralism in a new format. And this also shows that countries, particularly the global South countries, they are really tired of too much emphasis on the geopolitical divide, on the ideological differences. They want to focus more on economic development and focus more on really actions, for example, like climate change, against climate change, but also financial reforms and payment alternatives as well. So I think this BRICS summit gathering is really significant because also BRICS countries want to have more voice in the global geopolitical arena.
Okay, Vitelio, good to have you with us. Now, Brazil holds the presidency of BRICS. The theme of the summit is strengthening global South cooperation and more inclusive and sustainable governance. What are the expectations ahead of this summit? What are Brazil's objectives?
Thanks for having me. So Brazil is trying to focus on climate change because Brazil will host in November the United Nations Conference for Climate Change, the third conference. So Brazil is trying to not focus on reforms in global governance because there is uncomfortable responsibility here. Recently there was a war between Israel and Iran. Iran will be in Brazil. So there is a discussion inside the country about this, about the war between Russia and Ukraine also. So Brazil doesn't want that BRICS look like organization that will confront global organizations like United Nations, for example.
Wang Huiyao, this will be the first summit, the first leaders summit since Indonesia became a full member, and we are expecting the Indonesian leader Prabowo Subianto to travel to Rio for this. There are also, of course, the 9 partner countries. What does this continued expansion of BRICS accomplish?
Well, this BRICS new emergence since the last number of years has really highlights the huge changes in the history of mankind. It's because all those developing countries, large or small, are gathering together this represents an economic new momentum and economic new club. Basically, they want to favor trade, free trade, and maintain the existing order, but improve it. Of course, they're not going to change it, but they want to have some positive reform on that. And also, this model is really work well because it is not really judged by the ideology. For example, among the BRICS countries, you have countries of large like India, you have a country of China, but you have a country like Indonesia and also countries in the Gulf countries. So have a different governance style, different models, different ideology, but they can really all work together. That represents a new form of a global governance, in addition to the old-fashioned that we really autocracy versus democracy, that kind of divide. So I think this is very inclusive, is focused on economic development, but also having a big voice now in the international arena.
Yeah, we just got a few minutes left, Vitelio, and I was just wondering if you'd tell us a bit more about what Brazil would like to see at this BRICS Summit in terms of preparing for that COP30 meeting that will take place later in the year.
Brazil is trying to lead this global energy transition because Brazil has the Amazon rainforest, and Brazil sees itself as a leader in this issue. So trying to play together with China, India, other countries is a big role. The problem right now is that the US just left the Paris Agreement, and so we don't have an idea of the long-term strategy of the United Nations, of the United States. The problem is during the first Trump mandate, the US left the Paris Agreement, so Biden came back. So now Trump has left the agreement again. So there is no idea about this leader country, the US, in this very important issue and the strategy as a country, not as a government.
Wang Huiyao, we've also heard during the talks in the run-up to this summit that there will be a focus on new technologies such as AI. There'll also be a focus on global health and what can be done about that. What can we expect on that?
Well, certainly, I think that BRICS country doesn't want AI to be monopolized by one or two countries. I think it's a good idea that all the countries get together to harness this power of AI can bring benefits to the global South countries, particularly BRICS countries. So that's one. The other one is, as our guest said, it's in Brazil. And climate change is a champion there, and then so global South countries can use that the summit to push the climate agenda, whereas the US is backing off. But most importantly, as you just said as well, that BRICS countries are the best mediators. And the US defense minister already said that the peacekeeping forces in Ukraine has to be European troops and non-European troops, and the US said that. So non-European troops means China, India, Brazil, South Africa, and many more. So that will be really the final miles of peacekeeping to really connecting. And US already done that for over 160 days now. I think it's high time BRICS countries to step in to really make a peace happen for the world.
Okay, and that is where we have to leave it. Thanks to both of you for being with us. The 11 BRICS countries account for 40% of the global economy and roughly half of the world's population. For more on this year's priorities, let's bring in our next guests. Joining us from Santiago, Chile is Vijay Prashad. He's the Executive Director of the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. And Ibrahim Rasool is the former South African ambassador to the United States and founder of the World for All Foundation. He joins us from Cape Town. Thanks to both of you for being with us. Ambassador, the South African President, Cyril Ramaphosa, he will be in Rio de Janeiro for this BRICS Summit. Expansion of BRICS is something that many experts say will help African countries reposition themselves in the world. It gives the developing world a platform. What does this mean? What is your view? And how can they use this platform to push forward their agenda?
Well, thank you very much, Anand. I want to say that BRICS started off as an economic trade agreement amongst a few countries. It didn't have a very structured geographical location. It wasn't a regional structure. It was far more to trade, but also not to put all the eggs into the northern basket, particularly the US basket. I think the push and the requests for joining BRICS and for expanding BRICS has come largely because there is now a sense that we are dealing with an unpredictable United States. We are being caught up in a trade war. We are fraught geopolitical situations in the world, and more global South countries are needing the protection of a structure like BRICS. And it's an attempt to try and push BRICS to move much more off its trade agenda, but to also be a geopolitical bulwark against the kind of trade war, the kind of geopolitics, the unpredictability, particularly of the United States. But most importantly, there's also this idea that since it appears that the dollar is being weaponized, that there must also be protection against the weaponization of the dollar and the integration too much into the United States financial system and the Western financial system. So I think all of that is creating the push for BRICS to expand and for BRICS to begin slightly to change its nature into a multipolar forum of the world.
Ambassador, we saw the very disparaging reception that President Ramaphosa received at the White House just a short while ago. So when he goes to the BRICS Summit in Rio, what will South Africa's goal be?
I think that South Africa would go to Rio also very aware that the United States always has an empty chair. As the next incoming president of the G20, there's always an empty chair as the United States does not take up its position in the Sherpa community, as well as in the various forums. So in a sense, I think if you want to salvage even the G20, you're going to need to go to BRICS and to say, what can we do to set this agenda even for the G20? How do we use the leverages that BRICS has in order for us to forge ahead and to protect ourselves against a trade war, the unpredictable geopolitics, and the weaponization of the dollar? I don't think BRICS is ready to de-dollarize, and that's why it's not being entertained. But I think it may take a step towards independence by maybe deciding that we should be trading amongst the BRICS countries in local currencies and build up that kind of muscle so that we don't belong entirely with the dependence on the United States, especially not in these very turbulent times.
Vijay, good to see you as well. It's now BRICS Plus, and BRICS Plus members include Indonesia, Ethiopia, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Iran. And this summit is coming at a time when we look around the world right now, when we see the violence in Gaza, we see the unprovoked illegal bombings of Iran by the United States and by Israel. Add to that the continuing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And then, of course, as the ambassador mentioned, we have the trade war going on as well. What does BRICS as a group offer as an alternative to the structures that have been around for a very long time to try and resolve some of these crises and put an end to the violence that we're seeing around the world?
You know, the thing is that it's going to take a long time for the BRICS to be able to find a political voice. A couple of reasons why that is going to be the case. First, the variety of political expressions within the BRICS is quite striking. I mean, there is a kind of common minimum that holds the BRICS together. Nobody has tried to push the BRICS in such a way to test the common minimum. I mean, you just mentioned a BRICS member faced an unprovoked attack by Israel. You know, Iran did nothing to provoke an attack from Israel. Israel's attack was illegal. There was no Chapter 7 resolution from the United Nations Security Council. That's what makes it illegal, that they had no, as it were, permission to deal with a member state There was no threat to Iran, to Israel, and so on. And yet, from the BRICS, there was basically silence. You know, they didn't even come out into the UN Security Council and make noise and say this is an outrage. It's going to take some time because they really don't want to test the common minimum. I agree with Ambassador Rasool that at the present moment, it is almost quite enough for these countries to expand their South-South trading. I think it is interesting that the expansion of the BRICS took place largely bringing in oil exporting countries. If Brazil had not nixed the entry of Venezuela, you'd basically have had, except the United States, all the major oil producers in the world. Oil could at some point be the denominating asset for a new global currency. Although I know we're trying to move away from oil, it's not going to happen very quickly. But these things are going to take time, and one should not be impatient with the process.
So, Vijay, as you point out, this group is not without its challenges. It's a disparate group that each individual member has its own concerns, its own agenda, its own policies as well. But is there enough common ground, common minimums, as you put it, for them to exert some kind of collective pressure?
Well, if I'm quite honest, and I think it's hard to answer your question in any other way, what brings them together is a great concern with what is happening in the North Atlantic states, the United States and Europe. What they are concerned about are two things. Firstly, that this part of the world, particularly the United States, used to be the market of last resort. Whatever you produced in the world, the United States or the Europeans would buy. That part of the world, the North Atlantic, is no longer the market of last resort, which is why the idea of South-South trading is so attractive to the BRICS countries. That's the first issue. The second is the nature of the North Atlantic's unpredictability. I mean, the United States is sanctioning, almost every country in the world. Ambassador Rasool goes to the United States and Marco Rubio says you have to leave now. I mean, it's completely lawless behavior without consideration of the norms of international affairs, the importance of the UN Charter. United States went to war illegally against Iraq in 2003, the pressure campaign against China and imposed new Cold War, which China doesn't want. All of this sort of, let's call it what it is, this sort of cowboy mentality from the North Atlantic has many of these states with their very different political viewpoints concerned. The Indian Foreign Minister Jaishankar was asked, well, will India join NATO? And he said quite plainly, we don't accept the NATO mindset. Well, what's the NATO mindset? NATO mindset was destroy Libya, destroy Yugoslavia. This erratic dangerousness concerns all these countries with different political viewpoints. It is precisely what brings them together.
Ambassador, I just want to get to that point of your expulsion from the United States. As Vijay pointed out, you were expelled as the ambassador by the Trump administration amid all kinds of accusations, one of being that South Africa was carrying out a genocide against whites in the country. But when you look at that expulsion, was there a broader message from the Trump administration and by extension, to not just to South Africa, but by extension to BRICS as well, that if you don't comply with what we believe, what the policies should be, the Washington Consensus, as it's sometimes called, then you will face these kind of consequences?
I think the idea was to intimidate, for example, the diplomatic corps into not questioning their own sanity when they sit with forums with the administration, particularly where the president speaks. The intimidation was to prevent any pushback on the trade war and all of those kind of things. And so, for example, South Africa became very important for them because it convened the BRICS meeting where de-dollarization was spoken about, because it was the president of the G20 that the United States was actively boycotting, and because it found itself in the midst of a geopolitical storm, also with the ICJ case, against Israel for genocide. So what better way to push back on South Africa's case against Israel for genocide than by accusing South Africa itself of genocide against the whites? What better way to say, don't talk about Israeli occupation of Palestinian lands, you are stripping whites of their land in South Africa. So that was very much the game plan. And as a politically steeped ambassador, I was able to push back on all of those kind of things and was heard in the White House and therefore expelled. So I wear that as a badge of honor, and many people are now beginning to see exactly what it was that I was saying. But I think the main issues were South Africa's relationship with particularly BRICS, particularly its even-handed approach to the Russia-Ukraine war, its complete defense of our relationship with China, and the fact that it was building solidarity in the G20 for the global South. So those were the real issues that were underlying it. And I think that it was simply a way for the global North, particularly the United States, to bulldoze the global South into submission. And in order to do all the kind of things that our previous speaker has just spoken about.
Vijay, looking more broadly at global governance, and there's been a recognition for some time right now that international organizations like the United Nations, for instance, more particularly the Security Council, is in dire need of reform. Well, if we look at the continent of Africa, it has 3 non-permanent seats, but is pushing for 2 permanent seats. Do you think that effort is going to succeed?
Well, let's be very clear that neither Africa nor Latin America have a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. And it is peculiar that, declined countries that have been thrown out of the continents of Africa, Asia, Latin America, England or Britain and France. I mean, why do France and Britain have permanent seats in the UN Security Council? That gives the West 3 seats: the United States, France, and Britain. I find that ludicrous. The French should, out of a sense of solidarity, give up their seat to an African country, and the British should give up their seat to a Latin American country if they're not going to expand the permanent seats. That's something that you would say, would they voluntarily do this? Of course not. They still harbor a colonial mindset. They think they deserve to be there to veto issues, to permanently sit there and lecture the world about how things should be. No, it's not going to happen. Interestingly, when the BRICS was first founded, it's absolutely true. It was a commercial, trade-oriented body which came out of the worries of the North Atlantic credit crisis of 2007. That's true. But one of the first issues of debate and discussion at the BRICS meeting in 2009 was the question of United Nations reform. The UN Charter is one of the most beautiful documents that humans have produced. The UN Charter also is the most highly consensus-oriented charters. All countries in the world have signed on to it. And yet the structure of the UN, the way the Security Council has eclipsed the General Assembly, goes against the very spirit of the Charter. We need United Nations reform desperately. We don't want the colonial powers to dominate. As a Nigerian foreign minister said in 1963, we are fed up with being veranda boys. We want everybody to have a voice in the UN and not just listen to the old colonial powers telling us what to do.
Ambassador, what are your thoughts on reform of the United Nations? South Africa has been mentioned as one of those countries that should get a permanent seat on the Security Council.
I think it will be premature for intra-African competition for who those permanent seats are. Otherwise, the French will play the Francophone and the British will play the Anglophone and the Lusophone. I think that will keep the thing going. The principle must be one, that we need the reform of the United Nations, but it will not be won through simple appeals and diplomacy. I think the beginning of multipolarity that institutions like BRICS brings about the strengthening of the African Union, the South American and Latin American region, and the ASEAN and so forth. I think it is the gradual building of power that I think will disrupt the current system. And therefore, what is feared in Washington is not the shift from the unipolarity of that the United States enjoyed for the last 30 years into the multipolarity that BRICS is beginning to suggest, but it is the shift of multipolarity by BRICS into multilateralism, the ability to speak politics by BRICS and to break out of the simple economic structure that it is, and to begin to say, let us go to the United Nations as a bloc and oppose the bombing of Iran and oppose the occupation by Israel. And I think it is the gradual aggregation of those leverages and powers that I think will lead us to a reformed, not just United Nations Security Council, but the Bretton Woods institutions and all the other global governance institutions that the world is being dominated by the northern countries.
Vijay, as we've seen in these trade negotiations, President Trump is acting in the interest of himself or just in the interest of the United States. He's not shown an inclination to act in the common interests of the globe, whether it be at the United Nations, the World Health Organization, or at the G7. I mean, how does the global South, the emerging economies of the world, navigate this kind of reality?
Look, frankly, I think that we need to take a little lesson from this. It's about time. Let's take the case of the African continent. It's about time African countries just rejected the International Monetary Fund's austerity and debt program and came up with policies that first benefit the African states, industrialize African countries, stop the hemorrhaging of external finances out of the country into the banks in Europe and the United States. I mean, this is a great moment to stand up and say, well, you're saying America first. I'm going to say Zambia first. I'm not going to put the interests of the Oppenheimers and the, Greg Mills and so on ahead of the people of Zambia and the Copper Belt. So, I think there's a lesson to be learned here. You're not going to be able to get Mr. Trump to become suddenly interested in the global situation or the needs and desires of people in Africa, Asia, Latin America. He doesn't care about that. He cares about himself, his own country, and so on. Meanwhile, for generations, the global South, which fought against colonialism, has adopted a kind of secondary position and allowed these technocratic institutions to tell us what to do. No longer. Now we should also stand up and say, we have our own agenda. Thanks very much.
Okay, and that is where we have to leave it. Thanks to both of you for being with us. And that is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.